Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at medcomsnetworking.com and the associated websites. So information, resources, activities for people who work in and around the global medcoms community, by which I mean people who work primarily in medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, but the associated businesses and so on. Also, we provide information for people who would like to get a job in medcoms. So maybe you want to start as a medical writer, account manager or whatever. You'll find lots of information at firstmedcomsjob.com. And we do a lot of these webinars. We're doing a webinar today with a very international audience and quite a big audience, actually. We do a lot of these webinars and generate quite a lot of video content. You'll find all the recordings over at NetworkPharma TV. There's now more than 500 videos on all manner of topics. So plenty to go and have a look at. What we're doing today, and I think I'm going to start by making it very clear that it is the 5th of April, 2023, and it's 12 o'clock midday UK time. We're going to be talking about AI tools for medical writers and more generally the AI sort of field, and developments are happening so fast at the moment. I just think it's important to be very clear that what day we are talking on, because by this time next week, if not tomorrow, things could be a little bit different. We've had a bit of fun over the last few weeks. I've done a couple of webinars where we've talked a bit about AI. Today, we're specifically talking about tools for medical writers. I'm hoping we're going to give you plenty of food for thought. My mission at the moment is simply to get people in and around medcoms to play with AI tools like ChatGPT. I don't get why everybody I'm talking to is not already playing. That's not the same as saying we're using it in anger, but certainly at least playing. And I'm hoping that these guys from Trilogy, and I'm delighted you've come on board, thank you very much, are going to tell us about some of the real practical applications, because I know they've done some work. And I'm just going to leave it to you, Lisa. I'm going to hand over to you. I'm not going to steal your thunder. I think this is going to be a really fun presentation. And members of the audience, please, comments and observations and so on, questions, throw them at us. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Peter. Jamie, do you want to check the slides are actually working? That would be great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much, Peter, for inviting us to do this webinar. We're absolutely delighted to be here. I'm going to let my esteemed colleagues introduce themselves in a second, but since I'm already talking, I'll start off. I'm Lisa Chamberlain James. I'm one of the 4 senior partners at Trilogy. I am a medical writer, which always sounds like the start of an Alcoholics Anonymous type disclosure. I love medical writing, but I am not a tech specialist. I'm a medical writer. I've been a medical writer for over 23 years now. I am slightly unusual. I could actually just stop there. I am slightly unusual, but in terms of the medical writing sphere, I'm unusual because I'm trained in both regulatory and MedComms medical writing. So I'm kind of looking at it from both sides of the coin. But I'll now pass to Barry and he can tell you a little bit about himself.
Hi, I'm Barry Drees. I come from California originally, where I did my PhD in molecular genetics. I like to tell the joke, long before there was .com madness, there was gene tech madness, and that's where I started. However, doing research was not my thing, and I eventually moved over to medical writing, where I started in Germany, and I've been doing that now since about 36 years. And I was one of the founders of Trilogy. So me and 2 other people is why it's called Trilogy. There were 3 of us. I have been spending the last 3 years helping develop the Trilogy AI tool to write study reports. I understand that's not MedComms, but I am here as the voice of what you need to do when you develop a computer to go through masses of data and say something intelligent. So as to how that will work with MedComms, I can't answer that specifically, but I can certainly reflect on what we've done in order to make it work for study reports. Jamie.
Thanks, Barry. I'm Jamie Norman. I'm the Chief Product Officer for the Trilodox product. As Barry said, Trilodox span out of the expertise from the Trilogy business. I am almost the opposite of Lisa. I'm not a medical writer, but I'm a technologist. So my background is very much in product leadership, specifically in building AI products since around 2014 in the marketing automation space, procurement, and more latterly, obviously, pharma. So I'm going to be setting some of the context today for what's going on in AI, and then that should lead into some interesting conversations about the application for medical writing.
Thanks, Jamie. So today, if we go on to the next slide, Jim, please. Today, we'd like to tell you a little bit about what's been going on. We've been working in this space for a while now. We've been developing our own tool, as Jamie and Peter have mentioned. So what we thought we'd do is start off with Jamie telling you a little bit about AI. If you already know a lot about AI, this will be a refresher for you. If you know very little about AI, hopefully this will help to set a bit of context so you understand where we're coming from and why this is such a hot topic for industry. Then Barry's going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the regulatory space, because the two spaces are quite closely aligned when it comes to AI, but there's been quite a lot happening in the regulatory side that you may not be quite so aware of. And then I'd like to talk a bit about potential impacts for MedComms writers, because presumably we're safe, right? We're fine. And then the most important and exciting bit is the Q&A. And that's what this is all about. I'd really like to open the discussion to you all. I'm sure you've all got lots of questions, lots of experience, and it would be great to open the discussion and really just find out what this is all about and see if this really is a threat or an opportunity or both for us medical writers. So with that, I'm going to pass to Jamie and let you kick us off, please, Jamie. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Okay, as Lisa's already mentioned, we've got quite a varied audience here today. So I think what we decided what was best in terms of serving the audience is I give quite a broad background into AI itself, just to kind of set some context. We can understand where we're coming from, where things like ChatGPT, which is obviously a hot topic in the sector at the moment, where that fits into the bigger AI story and narrative. And then I'm going to give a little bit more information about what GPT might mean in terms of a technical perspective and how that might have an impact, which should lead into the further conversation. So for some of you, this might be new information. For some of you, you might be kind of very well aware of some of these ideas and concepts, but just to set the scene, create some context, I'm just going to kind of describe things in very broad terms. So AI itself isn't particularly new. I think it was first coined in a paper sometime in the 1950s. And in its broadest sense, at its very highest level, it's essentially any kind of computational technique that mimics some kind of human behavior. So that could be from very simple automation to some of the more advanced things we're seeing today. But as a concept, generally, it's not new at all. In fact, many of you will be on the receiving end of some AI in your daily lives, whether that's algorithms that dictate what Netflix recommendations you're provided. From a writing perspective, even spell check can be considered artificial intelligence. It's referencing a dictionary, it's referencing kind of potential suggestions in terms of the correct words. At a very simple level, that is AI. I think that term has probably changed over the last few years, and what we really mean now, we're moving into these deeper levels of machine learning, so pattern recognition in imagery, and then where the likes of ChatGPT come in, which is something more along the lines of something called deep learning. So this deep learning is essentially trying to create neural networks which almost mimics the sort of patterns of neurons in the brain and create patterns of recognition and learning that's more akin to what a human would do. And that's when the AI is getting much more powerful. And that's where some of these concepts come into play with some of the more recent technology. So there are many layers to it, but I think it's just useful to start with that context, just so we can see how things have evolved and where things sit. What I'm going to do next is I'm just going to go a level deeper and then just break that out into some specific things that are more easily referenceable that you might see in your everyday lives. So at the top, you've got things like deep learning and machine learning and predictive analytics, and this is very much where ChatGPT fits in, and I'm going to go on to talk about that a bit more in a moment. Some of the speech elements in terms of translating and understanding speech, translated to text and things like that. We're seeing it right now with the transcription of this call. That's effectively using that technology now. It's also used in digital assistants like Siri, Alexa, those kind of things. Some of the systems you might see in the medical space is obviously vision and image recognition in terms of identifying images and recognizing things like it's quite widely used in cancer diagnosis. And then just one to reference is something that's called an expert system. This is a system which is one of the kind of more traditional AI techniques, effectively using a set of rules that takes the knowledge of an expert and translate that into programmatic rules that can guide a program to kind of perform specific tasks. So I'm going to use this kind of network diagram just to kind of show where things like ChatGPT fit, just to create some context for that discussion we're going to have. So ChatGPT lives in a few of these areas. So it's processing language, So obviously it's going to factor into the NLP element there in terms of how language is classified, how information is extracted from documents, more latterly from videos and other sources as well, how that's translated, both in terms of the source documents from other languages, those kind of things. And then the deep learning element, I'm going to explain a little bit further on. GPT itself, we're all throwing this term around, ChatGPT, but I don't think many people really talk about what that means. What does this kind of GPT actually mean? So I think it's useful just to start from there to explain how that as a technology is transforming this space, why there is so much hype at the moment around it, and why it's really kind of leading the way in terms of this particular field. So the G is the generative aspect, though that kind of speaks for itself really. It's generating human-like responses. And for those of you that have tried it, you'll have entered a prompt into the window on ChatGPT itself, and then it'll generate some kind of response, whether you've asked it to kind of write a story or summarize some text or anything like that. That's effectively what that's describing. The pre-trained element relates to how the model is built. So a large set of training data is used. And as we go through these versions of GPT, more and more parameters are used for training the model. And that's making the model more powerful. It's making it more accurate in terms of the responses. It's kind of creating much more human-like responses, which is where I think some of the interest comes and how people are kind of wondering, how does this reflect my job? I mean, it can write an email, but what else could it do? And as we go through these versions, you see quite a significant increase in the number of parameters that are used. So from the original version of ChatGPT, the data sources was around 1.5 billion parameters, which seemed big at the time, but in the version that came out in around November, where the hype really took off, that had increased to 175 billion parameters. So a huge increase in the source and the training data around that. Another other element of the training is around the human input, because there are actual people training the models. So they will be giving feedback to the model itself on the responses and kind of helping the performance of that. Now, ChatGPT 4, which has just been released very recently, they've been a bit less specific about how many parameters that's been trained on. It's no doubt much more than the previous versions, but the focus now has been more on how accurate is it, how well does it perform, and they're trying to introduce more measures in terms of its performance, such as how well it performs against the bar exam and different kind of more human metrics. Because I think that as we get into the competition with other language models, you're going to find that it's not just going to become about the number of parameters that are used. There's going to be a much different factors that they'll use to differentiate their language model from the others. And ChatGPT are obviously trying to steal a march on the competition by having this very quick cycle of releases and introducing these new things in terms of performance, looking at other sources of data such as video and images that were introduced in GPT-4, and then in GPT-5, which is looking to be the training is due to be finished by the end of this year, but based on past performance or past their reputation so far, they're likely to kind of make some early access to that before the end of the year itself. And a declaration that OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, have made themselves, is that they're ultimately moving towards something, just as you're getting used to the term AI, they're introducing a term called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. So this is a point where it is more likely to mimic a human. So something more akin to passing a Turing test in terms of that vernacular. But that's the point that they're looking to get to, and ChatGPT-5 is the point where they're likely to kind of feel that they're getting closest to that. I think we'll probably start with where we are right now in terms of the current landscape, and I'll just finish wrapping up with the T, because the T is the significant difference in terms of what makes GPT so performant and has changed the game in terms of this space. It's relatively new. This idea of a transformer, but it's a different kind of deep learning algorithm that's much better at recognizing patterns in data, particularly text. And the thing that makes it so different is that it can process parallel streams of information at the same time. So when you've entered a prompt, for example, on the OpenAI website, trying it out, one of the things that have impressed people so much is how quickly it will just start returning a response. And that's largely an impact of this kind of transformer methodology that's really changed the game there. So
can I just jump in? Sorry, Jamie. I wouldn't normally do this, Jamie, but can I just interrupt you? I think Grace's comment or question is probably quite useful at this stage before we forget about it. You've been talking about parameters. Can you just cover off what that meant?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So when you train a model, they will provide a large set of source files in terms of text. So that could be references from the internet of trusted sources. More latterly, that could be video content. It's any source of data that's used to train the model. So the greater number of sources, the sort of more referenceable material the model has to be able to learn and kind of produce its responses. So these are basically known as parameters. It's quite a broad term because it could mean anything from a paper to a book to a Wikipedia page. There's a huge variation of sources, but they're generally.
But that makes sense, and I think that was a useful just a point that Grace raised there. So thank you very much for doing that. Thanks.
Okay, so I can't see the comments on my screen. Sorry about that. And just to put that into some wider context, when we talk about this sector at the moment, largely it's ChatGPT that people talk about. But obviously, you may have heard that Google have quite some experience in the AI space themselves. You'll have seen their experiments in the past in terms of performing against experts at certain tasks. Then they are introducing their Bard AI. They probably rushed that out in response to ChatGPT's launch. Because it's very clear that they're calling it an experimental release, and even ChatGPT have been very clear to say this is something for you to try out. And I think they kind of did very well there in kind of taking that first mover advantage in doing that. Facebook's parent company Meta has introduced their model as well. So what you're likely to find is, as I mentioned before, rather than a kind of an arms race in how many kind of data points they use to train their model and how well they perform in terms of the scale, they're likely to be improving the differentiation in terms of how accurate they are, how well they perform at kind of more human-centric tasks, that kind of thing. So as this space matures, you'll probably find that there's a convergence in terms of what are the kind of accepted criteria that means a model performs well or not, or whether it performs well at its task. What we'll also find is that these are very generic solutions at the moment. So you can ask it to do everything from write a joke to kind of translate, a medical paper. Now, what you'll probably find is that people will build layers on top of these platforms that kind of create some more specificity in terms of that niche knowledge to kind of provide more kind of guide rails for specific solutions. And that's where we are quite early in the life of these kind of tools. Just to wrap up, I'm just going to give some context for where Trilodox sits. So I referenced the types of AI training or models that are used across the industry. And in a very similar way, Trilodox uses natural language processing. We've trained it specifically on CSRs and medical data sources. But where we've found some huge wins really is on making more moves towards the kind of expert system model. So we're translating the expertise of medical writers that have worked in the industry for years and years. We can create much more specificity in terms of the outputs that it produces. And we may get on to talk about some of the sort of downsides of some of the large language models, one of which being something called hallucination. So you may have heard that sometimes they can make stuff up. And that could mean it could reference sources that don't exist and things like that. By applying more kind of guide rails, if you like, in terms of that expert system and rules, you can kind of prevent that happening in terms of saying that you can only interpret this information within these within these controls. And I think that's something that you'll be finding a lot more when solutions are built for much more specific markets. And that's where we've had most success with the experience that we've had as well. To kind of spark some of the debate in a minute before I hand over to Barry, I'm just going to wrap up with this summary from a paper that was published by the University of Pennsylvania into the labour market impact of large language models. And what they were trying to look at was which kind of professions are going to be exposed the most to these kind of models and how they'll be impacted. Now, the percentage exposure you see there's some caveats to this table, doesn't relate to how much of your job is going to be taken over by a model like this. It simply means how much exposure are you going to have in these kind of roles to AI and these kind of tools. And then it's obviously down to the profession to decide what that exposure looks like and what that means for them. So I think it's very interesting, and there's a lot of kind of writing heavy roles that are impacted here, which kind of guides us nicely into our conversation. I'm happy to share this paper afterwards as well if anybody's interested, as a point of reference. What I'm going to do now, though, unless this is a point to answer any questions on my specific section, or we take this at the end, but I'm going to hand over to Barry, and Barry's a lot closer to the medical writing market in the regulation space, and he's going to add another layer of context for that.
Okay, here's my slide, hooray. Okay, what have we learned about an AI being used for regulatory writing? And I've been taking a look at the questions, so I might try to sneak in an answer or two within what I'm saying. The big problem in regulatory writing, though, our big challenge is using different formats and kinds of data input. And this has plagued us since the beginning because nobody does their tables in consistent format. Just so everybody knows what we're talking about here, we have developed a tool with Trilodox from the opening screen that starts with SAS data output, what's called the TFLs, tables, figures, and listings, takes all that and writes a first draft of a clinical study report. And as you can imagine, different companies and different groups produce different formats and kinds of data. The real challenge is training a tool to use that. I also want to point out we did not use a big data approach, one of the things Jamie talked about, because there simply is not enough of all the different kinds of study reports you want to use to really get huge databases. Even with our large experience with lots of different clients, we didn't have more than 100 of that. And, big data talks about millions, billions, and things like that. So each pharma company uses a different template and a different process, which makes it very, very challenging to write a study report from that because the computer gets confused very easily. If you just make something that's in one cell to go into two cells to fit it into the row better, the computer's going to have a problem with that. There are a number of tools currently available that pretty much just transfer data from outputs. If you think back even 20, 25 years, tools were developed that could help write a patient narrative by giving you the age, the sex, the concomitant medications, medical history, stuff like that. And then you just put it into sort of a tabular format that greatly speeds up your writing of patient narratives. So that's the kind of thing that we have more advanced tools now, but that's pretty much all they do. Whereas our tool, and I think what the future will be, is more advanced tools will actually analyze the data, search for signals, and write meaningful text. One writer who used our tool and too late to actually get her thing submitted to the client, but she said afterwards, I will always want to run this as a sanity check. So for example, somebody wrote a question about fact checking. What's cool is these tools, you don't really need to fact check, unlike you do need to do that with a human, because they can go through thousands of pages of tables looking for certain kinds of differences or p-values or 95% confidence intervals, and they find it with unerring accuracy. That's what computers do well. What they don't do so well is to bring it all together and synthesize it, which is what Lisa's going to talk about whether we're all going to be replaced. Like I said, it's already being used for clinical study reports. I see the near future being that it will be developed to also be used for summaries, investigative brochures, and other regulatory documents. And of course, I see no reason, but I'm going to pass that to Lisa, why it won't step into the world of MedComms. Lisa.
Thank you, Barry. I can see a couple of the questions exactly around that coming up. So thank you very much for, I think it was Lisa who was giving me the segue into the section about MedComms. And I'm going to keep this very brief because I'm more interested in answering questions and getting the discussion going. So given what Barry's just said, and you would think, okay, this is very heavily data-driven and it's not creative at all, MedComms should be safe, right? Well, actually, AI has been used in journalism for decades. Actually, sports articles and finance articles and reports have been written by bots for many, many years, and written very successfully by bots. Most people don't even recognize that it is a computer that's writing the articles and news reports. But these are very formulaic, so it's much more like the regulatory sphere. But in MedComms, I just put up a couple of in the last couple of weeks, these articles have just come out about Firma AI and BioGPT. So Firma AI, for those who don't understand, aren't aware of, search is abstracts. So you could use Firma AI if you were in a conference and it was search abstracts to answer specific text-based questions. So you could ask it, and I do encourage you to play with it, summarize the key discussions around racial disparities in prostate cancer, or summarize the key discussions around the latest innovations in diabetes treatment. And it would go through all those abstracts and produce a summary for you. BioGPT is slightly different. It's been designed for life sciences, and its differentiator is that it's been trained on healthcare related vocabulary. So it's much more accurate in terms of the language it's using when it's summarizing documents and putting together its generative text. And that's just in the last couple of weeks. So this is a massively expanding area, which is why we're all here today. But where else could it go? I mean, you can envisage almost anything. I mean, certainly AI could help with monitoring medical affairs. If you're compiling competitor intelligence reports or doing some business development, you could use it to trawl a load of data sets to look for that and summarize it. Basically anything that's time critical. So those of us who have been used to burning the midnight oil at conferences, producing overnight news reports or summaries of the day's presentations, all of that could be automated. Poster design and writing, part of that could be automated. I know some MedComms companies are using that already and are doing that. And they're also using it in med education to start to produce summaries of very, very complex papers and articles for being used as part of the medical education offering. And honestly, it's really limitless what it could do. So we should all give up, right, and go home and go and sit on the beach and retire to Hawaii. It's not quite that bad. Next slide, Jamie, please. So there are some limitations, and we've touched on them already. There is at the moment, and I've used the word current, and it is italicized for a reason. I'm a medical writer. There is a lack of accuracy, and this has been well publicized, and the lack of accuracy can lead to a spread of misinformation. And we all saw in the COVID pandemic what misinformation can do. So that is a very, very serious concern, particularly in our industry, on both sides of the fence, reg or comms. At the moment, AI struggles to give a context to the information. It's literally going out there and trawling information that it has access to and producing a summary or a production of a table or some kind of output based on that information. So it only has the context that it can see, whereas humans can see a wider context. We can put information into a general sphere of human existence, for example. There's also an inherent bias. The information is based on what's already out there in the public domain. Well, if that is biased, so for example, if you are looking at a summary of abstracts in the medical literature, it can only produce a summary on what's already there. And I can see in some of the questions already you've highlighted the fact that ChatGPT was based up to 2021 and we're limited by what happened up to 2021. So there is an inherent bias in there and the lack of complete information there. At the moment, I think BioGPT does produce some supporting evidence, but most of the AI tools do not produce supporting evidence for their summaries. They just simply produce a summary, which makes it very, very hard to go back and QC. And there is, I've heard this term bandied around a little bit at the moment. Are they producing the next biological Wikipedia, where actually you could say anything and nobody really goes back and tests it all and checks it all? So I think where I'm getting to with this is that there is a potential threat there, obviously. I think if you are just doing something that's very formulaic, that can be easily replicated without any need for context, then I think that is a threat to that aspect of the job. Maybe it's not an aspect of the job that most of us would be very upset about giving up and having automated anyway. But the aspects that we rely on a human for, so all of our critical thinking skills, that at the moment cannot be overtaken by AI. That is the bit that humans bring to the table that I think is really crucial. And maybe what I would say is that we should all be honing our critical thinking skills, looking more about how we contextualize things, and really using that as to upskill and to make sure humans are really needed and have a seat at the table on that side of the equation. Next slide, please, Jamie. So before we move to the Q&A, I just wanted to put up some contact details for all of us. We've mentioned our tool. This isn't about particularly talking about Trilodox, talking about AI in total, but obviously our experiences with Trilodox, which is why we've referenced it. There's more information on the website. If you're interested in that, certainly reach out to any of us if we can help. But most of all, next slide, Jamie, please. Thank you very, very much for all of your attention. And I think now, Jamie, next slide, please. We can move to the Q&A section.
Great. Get that turkey in there, Lisa. Okay. Thank you very much. Jamie, can we lose those slides?
Sure.
To the audience members here, thank you for all the comments and questions that are coming through at quite a rate of knots here. We're not going to cover them all. We're going to have people in the audience getting frustrated because we're not dealing with your question and so on. But we're collecting everything and looking at everything, and who knows, maybe there'll be another webinar when we can pick up on some of the questions and so on. But importantly, what Lisa said was a part of the point of this is you can connect with each other and follow up and so on directly. So please do. But there's some fascinating questions coming in, covering an array of topics and rabbit holes and whatever, however you want to describe it. We're going to talk for 10 minutes or so. I'm going to want to talk for longer than that, but let's, for 10 minutes or so, try and cover off some of these questions. I'd like to start with one that there's quite a number of comments that come in and around, and maybe Jamie, you can talk a little bit about this. Obviously, as we're here, beginning of April 2023, I'll say again, we've just heard Italy banning GPT. We've got lots of stories about companies, I know MedComms agencies, that have told their staff, do not touch GPT because we don't understand the privacy, and so on. Can you just talk a little bit about that, address that point?
Yeah, I think that's obviously one of the hottest topics of them all at the moment. And I think a lot of that comes from a general uncertainty. I mean, you've even seen the likes of people that are quite big in terms of tech leadership, with the letter last week signed by Elon Musk, Mr. Wozniak,
and another 1,000
founders, and lots of others. You know, they're much closer to it, and even they have concerns. And I think a lot of that comes from uncertainty. What's happening is it's a very fast-moving space. And little regulation, or any regulation it's self-regulation largely. Any regulation that's kind of coming in to help manage that can't keep up with the pace of the technology. So I think for a lot of people, countries even, you know, their decision is let's just put the brakes on and let's just see where we go, because I think like everybody is asking, well, what does this mean? How can it be kind of abused and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of it purely comes from that kind of perspective of uncertainty.
One of the things that has occurred to me is, sorry Barry, but just as a comment, and seeing this sort of like coming and the comments and so on, I do think, and I just think this is a trap we all fall into with any discussion about this. Okay, you know, a lot of people have become aware of AI because of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is the be all and end all. And people are seeing reports about it, you know, failing because of this or doing that or whatever else. I'm very keen, probably too keen, to rush into conversations and go, but remember, this is just one example. It just happened to, the chat bot at the front of GPT opened it up to millions of us and got us all talking about it. But there's a whole array of tools, activities, and all the rest of it behind it. And what we can do with ChatGPT is not necessarily the same as what you can do with Trilodox or other people can do. So we're going to have to be a bit, maybe we can't be careful enough here, but just seeing the comments coming in, there's a degree of confusion going on about all this. And all I would ask people to do is just be a little bit careful and maybe think a little bit about what we're actually talking about. What I get excited about is all these examples showing what is possible, and it's transformative as far as I'm concerned. And if you don't go and play with ChatGPT, which is freely accessible to everybody, I don't understand. Full stop. Okay, I would just do it. Now, then you've got to understand the limitations. Then you've got to understand that there's lots of other tools and other ways of going about it, and so on. I just want to get that in there because I can see this confusion and I think we'll just have to accept that this is a very fast-moving, confusing area. Barry, I cut across you there. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's quite all right, but I like what you said because my comment addresses that as well. One thing we went out of our way to do with Trilodox is that when it makes a statement, it tells you what it's based on. So if it says this is a clinically important difference, it then tells you what the data cut it used to say that. And that also ties in with what Lisa says. Trilodox does not replace you. It tells you, I found all these cuts going through masses of data. Now you must decide, are those the cuts you want? Is that too conservative? Is it too liberal? Do you need to adjust the cut? And if ChatGPT did this, with each sentence, it would say, this was plagiarized from this. This was stolen from this. This was taken from here. And then I think people would be a lot less scared. Instead, ChatGPT just throws it out there and you're thinking, ooh. But I think at least in MedComms and so on, and in scientific things, it's always going to have to say, here's a statement. You met your primary efficacy evaluation based on da-da-da-da-da. And then that, I think, is really what makes it then sort of interactive and people say, that's what it's doing, rather than me personally having to go through 10,000 pages of data.
Okay, but let's just pursue that one a little bit and a particular angle on that. And Barry, you were talking about how you bought Trilodox, and let's just use Trilodox as an example of an AI tool, okay? But you've got Trilodox. You brought Trilodox into the workflow. And my understanding is it has significantly affected the workflow or reduced, frankly, the time scales, and it's taken out chunks of very time-consuming work. That has implications. It might be the grunt work, which we're all happy to get rid of. It might be also, but just talk a little bit to that, because I think that starts to maybe make people understand that this isn't about something that's magically going to write a paper for you and just take you out of the equation. But using the sorts of AI tools that are already available can have a huge impact on the workflow. And there are lots of different ways of going about it. And maybe people will choose different ways. Maybe there's too many to talk about, but just give me some solid examples of how it's actually, because I know it is affecting your workflow,
I would love to,
which has an effect on your business, basically.
One of the most difficult and challenging MedComms projects I did, I don't do tons of them, but I did one, was to put together a review of every clinical study using MDT, which is multiple drug therapy for leprosy. We found something like 380. I decided to put together the mother of all tables, listing the study, what region it was done in, how many patients, what was the dose, what was the percent resistance, et cetera, et cetera. Going through 300 and whatever papers and getting that information, only to discover that some of them didn't have it in the abstract. So I had to actually download the whole paper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Took me weeks. There was no real thinking there. It was just hunting. And let's be honest, humans don't do that well. I know we come from hunter-gatherers, but a lot of animals got away. And so when you get all the data, you can then look at it and say, oh, you know what? The creativity part that I want to organize it a bit differently or do the storytelling part, that I think will always be there. But the searching and the finding, and then when it finds something, it tells you. That, to me, in my opinion, is the great weakness of ChatGPT, is that it doesn't tell you how it decided to say this. It just does it. And you have to judge it somehow.
Yeah, there are, BioGPT does reference sources and everything. So, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a big leap to add that into the code. But I think there's an elephant in the room that I've seen a couple of questions come up on that I really think is important for us to address because of the industry that we're in. And that's confidentiality and ethics. The big problem with the commercially available out there bots is that as soon as you put anything into it, it's available, it's in the public domain. So I think we need to be careful. It goes back to what you said, Peter, about what AI we're talking about. There are specific tools that are very contained, and what is confidential stays confidential because it is not out there in the big wide world, which is why we developed Docs, because we can control all of that. That's very different from a pharmaceutical company, and I've seen somebody put the question out there, a pharmaceutical company just going out and saying, well, let's just use ChatGPT to write our CSRs, because everything was already out there. That just would not be acceptable, and the regulatory agencies would have an absolute hissy fit quite reasonably. So I do think that confidentiality and accuracy, particularly for our industry, is of the utmost importance. And whatever AI you're thinking of using, you have to really have that at the forefront of your minds, because all tools are by no means equal. And as Jamie said earlier on, there is this mad race to get the most sophisticated tool that can do more and more and more. And something has to give. There has to be something that isn't looked at when you're doing that. And I really think that's something, particularly for us, that we have to bear in mind when we're looking at using these tools.
Okay, but again, I'm going to jump in, right? And I'm sorry, but I'm following some of my little soapboxes here. In our business, we tend in this conversation to jump to the clever stuff, right? And the writers and very qualified, very clever, very able writers will immediately go, but they couldn't possibly be that I can be replaced because I have authenticity, I have creativity, I have this, I have that, I have the other, and all of that. Because MedComms, I saw one of my LinkedIn conversations over the last few days, someone said, pure MedComms isn't bland writing or something. But I do think it's really important that we think a little bit sensibly about what we're saying. You know, a lot of MedComms work is reviewing, researching, summarizing, abstracting, call it what you like. And in the good old days, a bit like Barry's talking about, you were given 300 papers and you'd sit and go through them and write it all in, and you know, wow, and that's a big project. And arguably, we're already at the stage where the AI, ChatGPT, let alone anything else, can go in and do that in minutes, right? Sure. Now, that has huge implications. That's not saying you shouldn't fact check and so on, particularly with something like ChatGPT. I get all of that, right? Okay. But one of my points is to people who haven't tried this before, that they don't quite get it unless they do it. You put, I shared a link the other day, which was, what is it? Use TLTR : the URL of the book you want to summarize. And the damn thing comes back to you that, you know, within seconds with a summary. Now, you've got to be careful. I get all the care stuff. I get all of that, right? But think about that for a moment. And if you start, and we're talking about confidentiality, if you take a paper, you know, it's publicly available, and what you want is a plain language summary, or you want a summary to put into some GP abstracting service that you're helpfully providing via the pharma company to, things can be done like that, perfectly sensibly and legitimately and credibly and every other which way, with a little bit of fact checking and QC. Now that has the potential to be very impactful on some areas of the work that we do. And that has implications. And the pharma company that is arguing with their agency about budgets, because we always argue with each other about budgets, right? Is it so illegitimate to be going, well, some of this stuff could now be done through automated processes, in which case the budget should illustrate that, or whatever. I know I'm straying into an area which could get very whatever, but there's got to be some common sense about this, because some of what we're talking about is not only more, it's more than possible now, and over the next few months, it's going to be very, very possible. Okay, I'm feeling like I'm going off on, but I think this is really important part of the conversation.
You're absolutely right, and I know some MedComms agencies are using it for exactly that reason, and so they should. You know, I said when I started talking about where it would fit into MedComms, anyone who's doing anything that's very routine, very formulaic, that involves a whole load of tranching data, yeah, that will be automated, and it should be, for sure. But to use your example, yes, if you want a plain language summary of a paper, absolutely you could automate that. If you want a plain language summary of clinical trial results, that's not so easy, because what's required is a human to look at that, to say, okay, this isn't just, I'm going to take 300 pages of CSR and produce a plain language version of it. This is like, okay, what's actually important to patients that I need to include in that? Now, at the moment, an AI has no sphere of reference for that. And I keep saying at the moment because this technology is expanding so quickly. And I've seen some of the comments online, you know, when do you think that critical thinking will be will be done by AI? I have no idea. That's probably a question for Jamie, not for me. I would be an idiot to sit here and go, no, AI is never going to be able to have any critical thinking skills. That's ridiculous. Of course it will. Time scale, I have no idea. I can only speak for where we are right now. And actually, in that example, yes, you could automate a plain language summary of a publication because everything that's in the abstract and in the paper should be translated into plain language. Plain language summary of the clinical trial results, no, not so easy because it requires context, it requires critical thinking. And that's the difference. So my advice to any medical writer is to think about what you bring to the table as a human in terms of contextualizing critical thinking skills. Those are the areas to focus on. Those are the areas to upskill and expand and use the AI tool as a tool to help you do that quicker, better, faster, more efficiently,
Exactly. Okay.
not doing so much QC. That would
Okay,
be
but we're
our approach.
but we're agreeing in the middle there somewhere. You know, and some, but it's just things in the comments and questions which sort of jump further than this, yeah. And it's you know, okay, it's a tool, but it's an incredibly powerful tool, yeah. And used in the right ways, it is literally taking chunks out of the workflow, and that is something that I think some people are just resisting thinking about, because it has an effect on business models and. I
Jamie,
was going to
wait,
answer a question that came.
I want to just jump in really
Okay,
quickly.
but Barry's trying. Jamie's trying to say something.
And I know Jamie's in there, but one thing that many people have said, and I just ran a very prototype for writing summaries, and I asked the writer afterward, what did she think of using it? And she said, what was the best feature was it really focused my thinking. And that I think is a great way to think about AI. It's not going to replace you, but it brings out the important stuff so you can really think, aha. And one of the cases about creativity in MedComms, people always say the treatment groups were similar, comparable, well-balanced in terms of demographic variables. What does that mean? No definition, nothing. Now you'll know what the basis of that statement is, and you can actually state it. And I think that's something that AI really brings. Okay, sorry. Jamie, go for it.
God, I'll ask you so on that front was, I liked the comment that came in about one of the writers is talking about using it as a sense check. They'll write their own first draft, and then they're sort of asking the AI tool to see what they think, and then they're getting this sort of sense check, and they're being it's another way of just going, yeah, is what I've written, apart from else, covering all the facts, because the points you've all made is there are lots of facts out there that you miss as a human being. So again, there's different ways of looking at this. Someone's just said this is a discussion rather than a Q&A. I'm sorry, but hopefully we're covering off the questions as we're going. Barry, Jamie, sorry, it's you who wants to say something. Go on.
A couple of points, just to expand on that. We're referring to it as a tool, and I think that's exactly right. I think rather than reviewing it as a replacement for a job, I would see it more as a co-pilot. So whether it's that sense check or kind of that doing that grunt work and that kind of thing, because that critical thinking element is still not there. I think it's very important to point out these are large language models whose very remit is to predict patterns of words. So it looks like it's a human that's written it, for example. They're very good at doing that, and the results are very impressive. But in terms of that critical thinking piece, that is very much not there, and that's where, as a profession, we come in terms of providing that skill set. And this provides a very good platform to build on or stand on to do that. But I think the perception that these are, thinking things or these models can be quite kind of warped just because the outputs look so good in terms of what they're producing, but how they're doing that. There's a really critical missing piece there.
And I'm not the only one, am I, who's with ChatGPT? I mean, that's the one I have access to, so that's what I'm talking about. You get into an argument with ChatGPT like you would with a human being, and then you have to go, hang on a second, this isn't a human being. And I do find that a little bit strange, and yeah, I find that quite surreal, actually, or can be a little bit surreal. We're over time. I think we should draw a line, actually. Those of you on the audience, please don't rush away, because we can carry on talking for a few minutes. But I think in terms of the recording, we probably should stop there. I guess the crunch question, Lisa, is, you know, where are we as turkeys? And, you know, are we talking about, I think we're saying, you know, writers can still write. There are still going to be writers about, but dare I say, the good writers have less to worry about than the not so good one. Can I put it in that sort of horrible term? Do you think there's going to be less writers because the writers that are there are doing more, etc.? Just wrap it up, Lisa, with a moment on that sort of basic point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think bear in mind that there are not enough writers to go around in this industry. I think that we are at less risk. But I totally agree with you, Peter. And in one sentence, the smart turkeys are going to be fine.
Right.
Okay. Isn't this like Charlotte's Web? Turkeys that can talk and write, they will have no problem.
Okay, look, guys, I'm going to say a huge thank you to you. Look, I know we could talk more. I know you're all very, very happy to hear from people, and I'd encourage anyone to be contacting you. LinkedIn is the easier way of doing it, or go to your website and look at Trilodox and so on. If anyone wants to know what I'm up to, medcomsnetworking.com. Join the conversation, #medcoms, particularly on LinkedIn, which is where I spend more of my time now. There's a lot of really interesting stuff around this topic, and we'd love to hear these comments. Huge thank you. I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to say, please, everybody in the audience, go and play a little bit and think about. Don't just listen to us. Don't just read something. Go and play for yourself, okay? And I'm going to say thank you very much for the recording. We're going to wrap it up. Everyone gives a little wave while I stop the recording. Bye-bye and take care.